Welcome to the Preserving Family Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to equip you to gain insight, information, and inspiration to help you protect, teach, and guide your family during these turbulent times. Our goal is to provide tools and resources to help you strengthen and preserve your own marriages and families. Now here are your hosts, Dr. Mark and Janie Ogletree.
Everyone, welcome. We're so glad you're with us today, and we always appreciate our listeners and your feedback. We do want you to know that this podcast is also on Spotify, and it's on iTunes, and it's on our website, preservingfamilies.org. And share it with people out there for sure that could benefit by what we're talking about today. Before we get started, we will tell you Murdoch Travel Church History Trip, August 6th to 11th. Still a few spots left, so we'd love for you to come. That's all we're going to say about that today.
So often, the way that we get these topics that we decide to talk about are just things that happen in our daily lives or things that we come across.
We stumble into things,
right? Or things that we've studied or read, or anyway, it's funny how things pop up. But just a while ago, I was having lunch with some friends and don't even know how we got on the conversation, but somebody said, "Is family home evening even a thing anymore?" And it kind of made me laugh and think, oh, is it? I mean, I haven't heard about it for a while. I haven't heard a talk in general conference on family home evening or have heard it really stressed. I mean, we hear come follow me all the time, and we hear scripture study, but at least I personally haven't heard family home evening much. So
I haven't even heard anyone say, we can't do that. We have family home evening tonight, or you just don't hear those. I mean, back in the old days, you would hear people talk about it even, right?
Yeah.
Or last night in family home evening, you'd hear those kind of discussions. We just don't hear
and now
those.
Monday nights aren't sacred anymore. Even here in Utah, Monday nights there's ball games, there's basketball games, there's church things, there's school things, and it's not a sacred, not so much church things, but you've been to meetings before. People have called meetings on a Monday night, which we always kind of laugh and we're like, wait, yeah, same. Is family home evening still a thing?
Well, I remember years ago, it was taboo to even call anyone on a Monday night. For the last 10 years, I get calls on church-related things every Monday night, right?
Right. So we're throwing that out to you guys. Is family home evening still a thing?
So we decided we would just dive in, do some of our own probing and investigating, but also go back to some of the original statements that church leaders, our prophets and apostles, have made about this family night and why it is something that should be important today more than any other time in the world's history. It should be one of the most important meetings on our calendar. Now, maybe one of the reasons people don't engage in a family night as much now as they did in the past is because maybe it's difficult, it's hard. It's not easy to have family home evening, right? We've all heard the famous statement that family home evening is the only argument that begins and ends with a prayer, right? We've heard that before.
Yes, we can testify that we had many of those, right?
Well, in our family, it was funny because we would always start with our 8 children, and that was always the big joke because maybe cause some contention, hit a sibling, just causing any kinds of trouble multiple times in our family. After the second or third time, it was like, okay, you're out of here. And once again, that was the fun part because at the end of this lesson, we'd look around and there'd be like, what, 2 kids left out of the and I'm exaggerating. It wasn't ever that bad, but yeah, it was.
We started thinking maybe they want to go up to their room.
It was kind of like Survivor. It was like who would be left on the island.
Yeah, well, then we realized that it was probably more important to make them stay for a consequence of their actions instead of let them go up to their room and do whatever they wanted
and escape,
to do.
Yeah. Well, it's not just us. I know that as we've talked to many people over the years, yeah, this has not always been the easiest thing. We know that for sure. In fact, Elder Bednar even talked about it in one of his general conference messages.
And boy, when we heard the story, we just looked at each other and laughed because we could totally relate to the story.
Right.
But Elder Bednar said, sometimes Sister Bednar and I wondered if our efforts to do these spiritual, essential things were worthwhile. Now and then verses of scripture were read amid outbursts such as, "He's touching me. Make him stop looking at me. Mom, he's breathing my air." Sincere prayers occasionally were interrupted with giggles and poking. And with active, rambunctious boys, family home evening lessons did not always produce high levels of edification. At times, Sister Bednar and I were exasperated because of the righteous habits we worked so hard to foster did not seem to yield immediately the spiritual results we wanted and expected. Today, if you would ask our adult sons what they remember about family prayer, scripture study, and family home evening, I believe I know how they would answer. They likely would not identify a particular prayer or a specific instance of scripture study or an especially meaningful family home evening lesson as the defining moment in their spiritual development. What they would say they remember is that as a family, we were consistent. I love that they knew that their parents did it.
Right. They were consistent. And I love when he said that not all of these lessons produced high levels of edification, because we actually asked our children, knowing that we were going to do this podcast, what they remembered, about family home evenings. And once again, no one remembered any lesson with a high level of edification. A lot of them remembered, Janie, a lot of your lessons, that you were doing cutouts and posters, and they remember some of the games that we played and some of those things.
They probably remember the treats we ate.
They remember the treats. I think we did an object lesson with prayer is like a cookie. We talked about the middle and the ends, and they talk about that a lot. Someone talks about an iron rod going through our bedroom. I don't even remember. Do we have an iron rod that went through our bedroom?
I think that was an object lesson we did.
Yeah.
Well, the benefit is I was in Young Women's and primary for a lot of those years of our kids early growing up, and anything that I was doing there, I would come home and just recreate for family home evening, so it was easy.
Right, and I was teaching seminary in those days, and so
you had a lot of object lessons.
Whatever the lesson was that day, or at least that week, that was certainly on my mind. And so we did have a lot of those lessons, but once again, I think our children would remember that, oh yeah, we always had it. That's what one of them said, and we were together, and I think they remember maybe the activities more than anything else.
So Mark, as we look at family home evening, why have we been invited by prophets over the years to have family home evening? I always like to look at the why so that we can, explain that to our kids. Elder Henry B. Eyring once declared, quote, "A wise parent would never miss a chance to gather children together to learn the doctrine of Jesus Christ. Such moments are rare in comparison with the efforts of the enemy. For every hour the power of the doctrine is introduced into a child's life, there may be hundreds of hours of messages and images denying or ignoring the saving truths."
Think of how potent that statement is. That statement, by the way, will never get old. We'll just quote it until the day that we die. But when you think of, Pew Research Center and other outlets are telling us about our children being on screen 7 hours a day, and I promise most of those messages aren't promoting gospel teachings or the love of Christ or the doctrines of the gospel. So when President Eyring talks about this idea of such moments are rare in comparison to the efforts of the enemy, we've got to take every chance that we have. Like Elder Eyring said, we would never miss a chance to gather our children together. So I think, Janie, that's certainly one reason. Another one is, we always like to have two witnesses, right? So here's President Hinckley. I want to promise you, he said, you fathers and mothers, that if you will teach your children, they will grow up with the love of the Lord, and the greatest reward you can have in this life, nothing accepted, will be to see your children walk in the truth, he said before the Lord. And so, once again, here's another prophet urging us, let's teach our children the gospel, and let's not let any opportunity go by.
Right. And then our current prophet, President Russell M. Nelson, I love this quote by President Nelson that he just gave a couple of years ago. He said, "So if we live in enemy territory and Satan is quadrupling his efforts, we need to create a home of refuge and a peace from the storms of life where our children and families can find peace, safety, and a place where they are loved, taught, and valued." And what better place to be taught and valued and learn all these skills in family home evening?
Well, I like to say, if he's quadrupling his efforts, we would have to quadruple our efforts just to be at even par. So if we want to get above him and ahead of him,
how do you say octobling? How do you eight times it?
Yes,
10 times it.
We've got to get we've got to find a way to get ahead of that. Janie, you and I have always liked this statement from Theodore Tuttle. Some of you may not remember him, but he was a member of the Quorum of the 70 for a long time. Really close association with Elder Boyd K. Packer. But he said, "How would you pass the test, parents, if your family was isolated from the church and you had to supply all the religious training? Have you become so dependent on others that you do little or nothing at home? Tell me, how much of the gospel would your children know if all they knew was what they were taught at home? Ponder that," he said. I repeat, how much of the gospel would your children know if all they knew is what they had been taught in the home? And we love the idea of home-centered, church-supported. and that it is the responsibility of the parents to teach the gospel to their children. And all we're saying today is one of the great avenues, one of the great forums that's been created in the church is this family night, right? This family home evening. Let me share just a really brief outline really quick of just the history of family home evening. Joseph F. Smith, who was a prophet that really emphasized the family and family teachings. It was April the 27th, 1915 was the date of the letter, where local leaders of the church were encouraged the practice of a weekly family home evening. That's where the phrase actually came from. And the letter described that event as a night of prayer, of hymns, of family topics, and instruction on the principles of the gospel. And really, not much was said about it at that point. And then in the early 1970s, Joseph Fielding Smith, who's the son of Joseph F. Smith, comes back and emphasizes this family home evening once again, but this time designating Monday night as the preferred night for family home evening and encouraging members of the church to really get on board and not hold other church-related meetings on Monday evenings. Now, this is really interesting to me. The church announces the Monday night family home evening program as an official church practice the week of October the 4th, 1970. On September the 21st, 1970, just what, a week or two before, is when Monday Night Football is launched. So I love what Glenn Latham wrote. He said, if you think that's a mere coincidence that the debut of Monday Night Football preceded the initiation of Family Home Evening by 2 weeks. Anyway, we have some oceanfront property in Arizona we'd love to sell you. But
that is truly Satan using distraction, right? To
his
take
greatest
away.
tool is his tool of distraction. So, and other prophets have talked about it too, but that's kind of the really brief history. But in the 1970s, and so what I remember, Janie, I don't come into the church until the early 1980s, but from probably the 1970s up until maybe about 2000-ish, maybe 2010, you were still hearing a lot about family home evening. But I'd say since 2010, I really haven't heard much. How about you?
Right. I remember as a child and even as a young mom, we had a manual. We had a family home evening manual, and it had different lessons, and it had object lessons, and it had cutouts, things that you would use to teach your family on all different topics, from gospel topics to, values and morals and things. But
Yeah.
we don't have that anymore.
Well, you were even in a family home evening group where you guys got together as a bunch of mothers and prepared lessons for the upcoming couple months.
Yeah, that was a fun part of me being a young mom. Is we had this fun group, and I can't remember. I was trying to tell my girls about it, but I can't remember if we did the whole lesson for like 6 or 8 different women, and then we would all come and exchange them, or if we did each a part of the lesson. I can't remember, but I have a whole file drawer full of colored laminated games, activities, lessons that my girls all covet. They wish that they had those today.
Yeah, totally.
So, and again, to reiterate, President Hinckley said, the Lord expects us to have family home evening one night a week to gather our children together and teach them the gospel. Isaiah said, and all thy children shall be taught of the Lord. That is a commandment. All the children shall be taught of the Lord. And the blessing, and great, he said, shall be the peace of thy children. Love that.
Yeah.
That our children will receive peace and refuge from the storm if we hold a regular family home evening. Elder Packer said family time is sacred time and should be protected and respected. Love that.
Especially in our communities. And another probably resource for us that we would recommend to everyone, because I think it's the greatest secret in the church right now, and that's the topics and questions section on your Gospel Library app. You could look up anything there, and Family Home Evening is there. What many people may not know is that there was a shift a few years ago, and the church moved from calling it Family Home Evening to just Home Evening. And we understand that, right? Because they're trying to really recognize that there are all kinds of families and individuals out there in different family circumstances. And also the idea that it doesn't necessarily have to be on a Monday night, although the church is still asking us to protect and reserve Monday nights for a home evening. In fact, maybe I'll just quote from the church handbook right now. If anyone has their handbook, and you can once again assess it on the Gospel Library app, it's 2.2.4, home evening and other activities. So once again, not family home evening, but home evening. Latter-day Prophets have counseled church members to hold a weekly home evening. This is a sacred time for individuals and families to learn the gospel, strengthen testimonies, build unity, and enjoy one another. Home evening is flexible according to member circumstances, and it may be held on the Sabbath or other days and times. And it may include gospel study and instruction, of course, Come Follow Me, serving others, singing or playing hymns and primary songs, supporting family members. And when it says supporting family members, it mentions the Children and Youth Development Program, which is, in our minds, almost extinct, right? That was released right as COVID was rolling out, and we've had a hard time getting our momentum for that. But what a great time for parents and children to work on that together. A family council is another suggestion to set goals, resolve problems, coordinate schedules. Of course, recreational activities, service, sharing talents and activities. Now I'm quoting from the topics and questions on Family Home Evening, where they talk about family council, setting goals, resolving problems, just all kinds of things can be done in this meeting.
Mark, that takes me back to when all of our kids were home, and I know we would always talk about it on Sunday night or Monday morning, like, what are we doing for FHE
You and
tonight?
I would talk about it, yeah.
And there was never a shortage for anything to teach our children. I mean, a lot of times we would look at our kids and what do they need? But I felt like there's always great scripture stories. There's always incredible lessons in the New Era and the Friend magazine. There's gospel topics on our gospel topic library. There's great stories that you hear. There are
great conference talks.
Conference talks. We can teach manners. We can teach values. We can teach skills. I mean, we would get so overwhelmed that there was so much to teach that we didn't know how we would get it all in. And obviously we didn't. And it's funny because I think some things that we taught our older kids, and it's like you have to keep repeating it because you don't know. With 8 children, we never know who got what lesson. And so I felt like we were on repeat a lot, but I still think some kids miss certain lessons. And I don't know.
Sure.
It's just an endless process to teach our children. But it's not for a lack of material and what should we teach.
No, and I remember, just being honest with everyone, that if there was an issue with our children that we were working on, if we felt like they weren't doing their chores, or if they were getting a little bit lazy, or if there was contention in our home, we guaranteed we'd be having a lesson on that, right?
How many lessons did we have on speaking with the tongue of angels?
Yeah, we had a lot
and not
of those.
Fighting and arguing.
Right.
And that we need to love one another and serve one another. I think that was on repeat once a month.
Right.
Mark, did you know that there's a lot of people in our country that hold a regular family night? They might not call it family home evening. They're not members of our faith, but they have a family night where they gather, they go do something fun together, or they have a meal together, or they play games or whatever. And I've actually looked that up online before, and it comes up a lot. Here's ideas to do with your family, because I think people see the value in that, of gathering their family together to create unity. And I think in our world today, if you don't be intentional about pulling your kids in, whether, again, if you're of our faith or some other faith, it doesn't matter. But I just think people are recognizing that you have to be intentional in order to preserve your family. You have to gather them. We have to do things that are fun. We have to bond and create memories with our family.
Right. And it's always interesting. We talk about this a lot. We talked about it in our last podcast episode. But there is research, everyone, believe it or not, there is great research from people who are not of our faith and of our faith, showing that this family night idea, the idea of gathering your family together on a certain night of the week to have family time, there are great blessings and benefits that come from that. In fact, one study showed that when family engage in consistent rituals, such as a family home evening, that's what they actually call it, they'll experience greater family cohesion, improved communication, and build stronger relationships between parents and children. Another study done by some BYU researcher showed that children and teenagers in families that prioritize having shared activities together, they are less likely to engage in risky behaviors, such as substance abuse and premarital sex. Interesting. One study published in the Journal of Marriage and Family, which is the most prestigious journal in my field, found that regular family bonding activities contributed to lower rates of depression and anxiety among children and teenagers. Once again, that's so important today, as we have so many that are struggling with those type of mood disorders. Another one, Columbia University study. Children and families who eat together and do activities together perform better academically. and have fewer behavioral problems. And of course, we always like to say families who play together stay together. But in this research study, families who engage in fun activities together report higher levels of happiness and satisfaction in their relationships. And we could get into that, in more vivid detail if we wanted to, but I think these are really important statements for us to think about as we are considering now the blessings that our leaders have promised us when it comes to family home evening. There have been wonderful promises and blessings shared by our prophets, seers, and revelators over the years. And there are a couple that we would like to point out. And one of them is from the first presidency when family home evening was rolled out in 1915. And I love this, that if the saints obey this counsel, what is it, to have a regular and consistent family home evening, we promise that great blessings will result. Love at home and obedience to parents will increase. Faith will be developed in the hearts of the youth of Israel, and they will gain power to combat the evil influences and temptations which beset them. In fact, President Harold B. Lee said years later that the weekly family home evening is the Lord's way to build the foundation that will safeguard our youth against the ills that beset the world. Now, all of these things that doesn't mean we're not going to have trouble, and it doesn't mean we're not going to have challenge and that our youth won't stumble onto rough times or a rough road, but there are promises there that if we faithfully do this, that the incredible blessings will fill our homes and our hearts. And I think we need to have faith in those blessings and try to claim them, is what I would say.
Mark, over the years, we've watched and been invited to and loved and, combined with other families and just seen different versions of what family home evening looks like. And you can do anything, right? Like you said in the handbook, anything from come follow me to sing songs, to teach lessons, to fun activities. But we are always surprised how many people just do the fun activities. They play games and they eat ice cream, but there's not much teaching going on.
Or if we're at one of our kids' games on a Monday night and we're all together, well, that was family home evening.
Right. And sometimes I would get annoyed with you because if we did have one of our daughter's basketball games or something on a Monday night and we were all together, we'd come home and you still would say, nope, we need to have a lesson. And it'd be 9:00. I'm trying to get kids in bed. And you'd be like, even if it's 2 minutes, we're going to have a lesson.
Sorry about that, honey.
No, but looking back, I'm grateful for that because I love spending time together and that is great, but I also think there needs to be teaching that goes on. So if anybody's not doing family home evening right now, just at least start with gathering. Start with whether it's gathering to eat ice cream or go on a fun activity and then maybe ease into lessons but if you already are meeting together, now start teaching a principle and have your kids teach. We are always shocked and amazed. Their lessons were 10 times better than ours.
And they put more time into it sometimes.
They would, they'd hear stories in seminary or they learned things in their Sunday school class or their primary class that they would come and then share, and their lessons were awesome. And their games were way more fun too. So,
right.
But that's just, I think, an incentive that wherever we are at on the family home evening scale, let's up it a little bit, whether it's even just starting to have it or get in the routine and the tradition, because that's a great tradition. When we talk about traditions, family home evening is a great tradition. And I know with these promises, Mark, when you and I first started out and we were first married, that we read some of these promises and we thought, wow, if that's true and that will bless the lives of our children, that is something that we're going to do. And I can honestly say we were really bad in a lot of areas, probably as parents, but that was one area where I think that we were really good at.
Tried to be consistent anyway.
Yeah.
Right?
And I can probably count on one hand the times that we didn't have family home evening. And it doesn't mean it has to be all out. It doesn't mean it has to be 2 hours. It doesn't mean, sometimes we did it in 5 minutes, at least some kind of small lesson or we're together. But I love that we, like Elder Bednar said, we're consistent. And our kids, I think, could say a lot about us, probably good and bad. But one thing that I know would all say is that we love the gospel, that we love the Lord, and that we tried to teach them the gospel.
I would agree.
And so, yes, we had many other shortcomings and failures, but I think that that's one thing they could say because we held family home evening every week. And I think we reaped the benefits and blessings. I look back and I can really attribute that to family closeness and all kinds of different things that have really blessed our children and our family.
Well, maybe we could just share 3 ideas as we kind of finish today, and I would say one of them is, let's make sure that the gospel's being taught. I mean, sometimes people don't understand that you can have fun and teach the gospel at the same time, almost simultaneously. It doesn't have to be one or the other, but I think
that was one of your favorite things, Mark, is like if we went bowling as a family, you would tie it into the gospel somehow. Or you'd get the kids engaged and say, now, what does this have to do with the gospel? And let them come up with, I mean, they were amazing. They would be like, they would blow us away with their thoughts and ideas.
With their analogies or their
Yeah.
processing. Yeah, so I'd say number one, we want to teach the gospel. And once again, that could be done in a fun way. There could always still be a fun activity at the area. And I know, Janie, you were always good about having some kind of treat or whatever, and probably some kind of game or activity. But some of the things that we did besides scripture stories is there was a book called Teaching Your Children Values. I remember there was a season in there where 12 chapters, 12 values, and every month one of the family home evenings was dedicated to that. I know when our children were teenagers, one of the family home evenings every month was focused on a For Strength of Youth topic, and often our children were given the assignment to teach that.
Sometimes we taught out of the Gospel Principles book. Do they still have that? I don't even know if they still have that.
It's on your Gospel Library app, I think.
I think it's for new members and investigators with really basic principles of the gospel. And we wanted to make sure that those basics were really covered. And so we would try to teach our children like they were investigators and start, look up scriptures and teach them the basic principles of the gospel. So that's a really good tool and manual.
So number one is probably to teach the gospel. Number two is, I would say, to certainly have fun. And then, Janie, you said something so profound. I think we should talk about it for a second. And that's having our children teach. Often in the church right now, we've kind of moved into an era where it's kind of a cool thing to let the youth teach the lessons. And I think one of the biggest mistakes we're making on that one is we're not teaching them how to teach first. And so we're handing it's like handing an 11-year-old the keys to the car and saying, good luck, right? Let's teach our youth how to teach first, and then let's let them teach. But to give an 11-year-old the manual and say, you got a lesson for the next 50 minutes, like our granddaughter, Addie, right?
Our granddaughter, she just turned 11. She's been in Young Women now for 3 months, barely 3 months. And she has the full lesson on Sunday. And when she told me that, I was like, oh, Addie, can you do that? And she's like, yeah, no one else volunteered, so I did. But
and Addie will do great, I'm sure.
She will, because in their home, they are taught the gospel of Jesus Christ. Their parents do a great job teaching. They have fun with the gospel. I have full confidence that she'll be able to pull this off. But what about another child who has never had experience talking about the gospel in their home, or bearing testimony, or sharing, or even have a knowledge to develop a lesson?
I'm all about kind of an incremental progression there, where when the kids are younger in our church meetings, let's let them take 5 or 10 minutes and give them a shot at it.
Little section.
Yeah, and let them really
learn line upon line.
Yeah, and let's teach them how to teach. And then when they're a little bit older, we give them a little bit more. And then by the time they're 17 or 18, maybe they can teach a whole lesson. But also, we've got to teach them how to teach. But
that happens in our home, in family home evening. Where else is it going to happen?
Right. But we know the person who benefits the most from preparing a talk and giving it in sacrament meeting is the person who gives it, or the person who prepares the lesson. They're going to benefit the most. And that's where Joseph B. Worthland said once that the more children discuss what the gospel actually means in their lives, the more will be their inspiration, growth, and joy as they try to solve their problems, concerns, and challenges. So let's help them get the gospel in their hearts. And one of the ways you do that is by letting them teach.
Right. And I love the quote that says that our testimony is found in the bearing of it. And as our children prepare a topic, teach it to their family and their siblings, and then bear testimony of it, that's when they will be affected and feel the spirit of it.
That's when it penetrates their hearts, and that's where conversion starts. I fully agree.
So I just want to tell parents that it's never too late or never too early to start this tradition of family home evening. If
Right.
you have little tiny babies, still gather together on Monday night, sing a primary song, sing Jesus Wants Me for a Sunbeam, show them a picture of Jesus. That's all it takes. But get in the habit early of doing this. Our kids loved it. When they were little, they could not wait for Monday night.
Well, I remember we even had a daughter who, if we were late, she would remind us that, wait a minute, it's family home evening. What's going on here?
Yeah.
We got busted a time or two from her, I think.
Well, and the question on Monday afternoons when they came home from school is, what treat are we having for family home evening? Or, what are we doing? And so kids really start to rely on that and look forward to it and love it. And even as teenagers, even if they're fighting and we don't think they're listening and they have their head down, they're getting way more out of it than we give them credit for. And this is another quote, kind of like the Elder Bednar quote, but this reminds me of from Elder LeGrand R. Curtis, who was a member of the Quorum of the 70. He said, children need to know that their parents love them enough to teach them the gospel. Monday evenings can be made special by family home evening, by the love present, by the music, games, and valuable learning moments. We have found that the child who is rolling on the floor during family home evening listens and learns more than we think possible.
That's comforting to know that, right?
Yeah. And Mark, I heard a story a while back about a family who would gather their family together, but they had a son who was really rebellious, and he refused. He said, I'm not coming. He refused, and he'd go down the hall and into his room and slam the door. And they decided, okay, well, we're just going to keep going. And they said after a few weeks, they noticed that he'd go into his room, but he started leaving the door open. And so as they continued to teach the gospel, as they continued to go forward and bear testimony, within about several months, that son decided to come back. I thought, how powerful, even if we have rebellious kids, even if we have kids who we think are sleeping, even if we have kids who are fighting and their head is down, they're hearing and they're getting something out of what we're talking about. And if it's nothing else than just feeling loved and unified as a family, they're getting something out of it.
Yeah, well, I love that. Once again, I go back to remembering a lot of the family home evenings we must have had. And you know how it is when you get to be in your 60s, you kind of look back and think, I don't know if I even remember some of those real well. In fact, it took our children reminding us of the time that maybe we cleaned the church or the neighborhood on a Monday night. I do remember one where we moved from Texas to Utah, and we actually talked about First Nephi, the first few chapters of Lehi and his family moving into the wilderness. That seemed really relevant. One daughter remembered a blindfolded obstacle course that we did. Of course, they remember all the little lessons with Janie's cutouts, and one remembered the Joseph Smith Olympics with a stick pull, different object lessons, making some movies. They all had their little memories. But the one that I remember, and I'll share it with you as we finish today, because it had a huge impact on me for different reasons, was the time that our twin daughters, Madison and Mackenzie, wanted to invite their 5th grade teacher. We lived in Texas, so she was not of our faith. But they wanted to invite their 5th grade teacher over to our house for dinner on a Monday night and a family home evening. And we said, hey, that's great, but let's practice a little bit. Let's make sure we got this down and we're on our best behavior. So we did a couple practice runs and felt like, okay, we're up for this. And Madison and Mackenzie wanted to do the lesson that night, which they did. And to this day, I don't remember what that lesson was. And I don't think they remember what it was either. But Mrs. Thomas came to our house and we had dinner, and dinner was fine. We were hoping our kids would be perfect, but they were just normal, because I think someone spilt milk or something or whatever. But it was a good dinner, and we had a good conversation. Everything was fine. We cleaned that up and moved from the kitchen into our family room, where it was time for the lesson. The first thing that we do, like many of your families, is we would sing. Now, I'm going to tell you, I hope this comes out right as I preface this, but I'm here to tell you, I assure you that our family nights were no different than any of yours. We weren't seeing angels. We weren't having visions. People weren't crying because it was so spiritual. It was pretty normal, pretty average. But we could sing pretty good. We could sing pretty decent. And of course, the song on this night was, I Am a Child of God. And as our children sang, my thought immediately was, oh my gosh, guys, this does not sound that good. This is not, in fact, this may be the worst version of this song I think I've ever heard. But as they were singing, I glanced over at Mrs. Thomas and she was crying. And our kids even looked at me, and we finished the first verse and they looked at me like, what do we do? She's crying. Oh no. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know. Okay, let's just keep singing. And so we sang the other verses and Mrs. Thomas just kept crying. And when we finished that song, Mrs. Thomas said, no one has this anymore. Families don't do this. No one has what you have. Now, once again, I want to be very clear that we have what your family has, right? There was nothing special, nothing out of the ordinary. I'm sure in McKinney, Texas that night, there were a couple hundred other families having family home evening as well. It wasn't like we were special or spectacular in any way, but it was Mrs. Thomas' view that people don't do this anymore. Families don't sit around and sing and talk about the gospel and sing religious songs. Madison and Mackenzie then moved into the lesson, and I'm sure they taught a great lesson because I know that they prepared well. And once again, I don't remember what they did. The only thing I remember, for whatever reason, our 7th grade son, our only son Brandon, decides, you know what, this would be a great time to grab my baby sister, Natalie, and just throw her up in the air as high as I can. So he starts in on that. He's never done it before. I mean, he's thrown her up in the air before, but never really felt inspired to do that right in the middle of the lesson. But he did that, and I kind of looked at him. I gave him that dad look like, what are you doing? And he just kept doing it. And then I was in a position where I could put my foot on top of his foot and push down a little bit. This was kind of like under an end table. I was trying to hide it a little bit, but I was trying to give him the signal that, hey, this isn't cool, that we're in the middle of the lesson here and you're just throwing up your sister up in the air. He didn't get that message either. And so it took me actually standing up and intercepting my daughter, catching her and looking at my son like, what was that? Anyway, they went on with the lesson. Everything was fine. And then Mrs. Thomas left. And we wanted to keep it positive, and so we always did like a little debriefing after. And so after Mrs. Thomas left, we talked about, okay, guys, here's some things that went really good. Here's some things we probably could work on if we're going to do this again. And we kind of went about our business. Now, I wish I could tell you that after that, Mrs. Thomas came right back. She wanted to take the missionary lessons and join the church, but that's not what happened. However, about a week or so later, maybe a few days later, I drove home from work, parked the car in the driveway, walked out to the mailbox to grab the mail, and I noticed there was a note from Mrs. Thomas. And I wish more than anything that I would have kept that note. It would have been a great note to keep. But in that thank you note, Mrs. Thomas thanked us for the dinner. She thanked us for the family night, or whatever she called it, the lesson. Thanked us for inviting her over and said, boy, that was such a great song. And in her note, she said the same words again. She said, no one has this anymore. You guys have something special. People don't do this anymore. And once again, we understand that a lot of people have that. She just wasn't aware. But anyway, but that was what she said. No one has it. And then she said, I think my favorite part of the night, though, was when your son threw your baby daughter, his baby sister, up in the air. And I'm reading this going, are you kidding me? That was the worst part of the whole thing. And she's like, no. Well, she wasn't like, no, but she was explaining in her note that she loved that. And she said, I just thought it was super cool that a 7th grade burly boy, she knew our son was a football player, would be so interested in his baby sister. So I was getting one thing out of that, and she was getting something totally different out of it. That was another lesson of we take different things away from these experiences. But that was a great, great little note that Mrs. Thomas wrote us. My daughters, they still keep in touch with their teacher on occasion. They contact her through social media. I'm sure there are some great memories they have between each other. To our knowledge, Mrs. Thomas has never joined the church or anything, but that was a great, great reminder of several things. And we had a few of those in our life where people were invited, not of our faith, into our home where we were able to share a gospel message and try to make some kind of difference. Well, everyone, we have a testimony of the church's home evening program. Or in other words, we have a testimony that teaching the gospel in the home is one of these most important things that a parent can do. We have a testimony that having a fun time in our homes with our children and bonding with our children and laughing with our children is also one of the most important things that we can do. So the invitation this week on Let's Do Something, LDS, is super easy. All it is if you do have a regular family or a regular home evening night, then great. We applaud you. Keep it up and maybe find ways to make it balanced where there is a nice leveling effect of not just gospel teaching, but some good time fun and that kind of thing. But then the other invitation would be to those who have kind of gotten out of the habit or just really haven't started this tradition, is start something and start it small. Like Janie said earlier, even if it's, hey guys, tonight we're going to have a prayer and eat ice cream. I mean, that's wonderful. Or tonight we're going to read one verse together and then talk about it for a couple minutes. Whatever you would need to do, whatever fits your own family. We promise you that there are great blessings in store for anyone who teaches the gospel to their children in their homes. Greater faith will develop in the hearts of our youth. Their ability to fight temptation, to resist temptation, to feel more strongly about the gospel, about the scriptures, and about living prophets, but also to have greater peace, love, and harmony in our homes. I mean, those blessings are all there for us. So everyone, thank you so much for being with us. Is family home evening still a thing? Is home evening a thing, as it's now called? Yes, it is a thing. Not only is it a thing, but it's something that can make a huge difference and really help deepen the conversion and the testimonies of all of us. Everyone, we hope you have a wonderful week. Please feel free to share this episode with anyone who could benefit by it. We look forward to being with you next time. Until then, keep smiling.